Hi everyone, and welcome to the final episode of Lockdown Dads. This is episode number 46. My name's Ady Griffiths. I'm the founder of Inspiring Dads, a coaching business that helps stressed dads balance work and fatherhood.
And I'm James Miller, author of Dads Don't Babysit. And I admire Ian's claim that this will be the final episode of Lockdown Dads. It's supposed to be. Still part of me worries that lockdown is going to come back. The bat signal will go out from, I don't know who, that, dads need to listen to some more men talking about stuff in lockdown in November, but I hope not. Let's be positive, right? Let's try and be positive and say this.
I think you're right, James. I think at the moment we don't have any more. We should say we don't have any more guests scheduled, and this is supposed to be the wrap up. So maybe we're being a little bit optimistic, which is actually, if we think back before we go to how are you, which is, we both watched or listened back to episode number 1. And it was one of the things that was quite striking for me was that how quickly we thought lockdown would be over and that this show would be irrelevant. But here we are, 46 episodes in, and we've had a great time. And I think today, if we have a little toast, metaphorically speaking, we could toast the show and the listeners, but also Freedom Day, because we're recording on Freedom Day. And James, maybe that's a good place to start with. How are you feeling today on Freedom Day?
Yeah, it's a tricky one, isn't it? Because I don't know. By the time this goes out, let's face it, Freedom Day feels like a sick joke. Let's face it, particularly for somebody like you who has a child at home because their bubble has burst at school. I mean, touch wood, we're hanging on and scraping through to the end of term. But I know so many people that are having to self-isolate because they've been pinged or because their kids have got it. Actually, a lot of kids got it. It doesn't feel, I don't feel very free. I feel extremely concerned that I'm going to catch it in the next week, and then my week off next week is going to go to hell in a handcart and I'm going to be trapped in my house. Fingers crossed it's all going to work out. I think, that's the bottom line, right? Is that we all want this to be over. We want the government to get it right. We want it to work out. I don't know how many of us have confidence that it will, but so I think that's the sort of overriding feeling at the moment for the how are you just now. Let's talk about how we were on episode 1 very shortly, but it's a sort of there's a lot of uncertainty around still. I think is perhaps even more uncertainty than when we recorded episode 1, but let's talk about that in a tick. Let's first of all cover off, as I say, you have one child at home, so how are you?
I'm a little bit bored of the extra unexpected week of homeschooling. I think it's the hope that you might get to the end of term and then the sudden sort of taking away of that. I'm quite a big fan of working in chunks, but actually the chunks have got a lot smaller when you've got an 8-year-old who needs supervising or setting up for the next thing. So it feels like Freedom Day. It feels like a big experiment in terms of just how effective are the vaccines. But then on the other hand, and I was just exchanging messages in a WhatsApp group this morning with a friend of mine who lives in Melbourne, and they're on lockdown number 5. And case-wise, hardly any cases in Australia, but a very different, perhaps a very different approach, and yet still struggling to go back to any kind of normality. So I kind of hope it would be okay, but I'm hoping that my daughter, who's in her last term, her last week of primary school, will at least get to the end and she can have a prom, which is due for Friday, and they got a disco on Thursday, and fingers crossed she can do those things. Although we're now out, I think there's 4 year groups out of 7 are now self-isolating at her primary school. So we've crossed our fingers and hope for the best, I think.
It's a sort of jumble, I guess, is how it feels at the moment. There's a lot of sort of in your head, because I guess it's for you, right, in January, we were pitched back into homeschooling. It's like, right, okay, we're back doing that again. We know we've got to do it, and we know we're going to be doing it for quite a long time.
Yeah.
Whereas now, you've got this talk of Freedom Day, and that kind of jars with the actual lived experience. And you don't know, as you say, you're just waiting. What we've got, few days you want to get through, but you just don't know if you're going to get there. It's that. I think that's very hard to deal with. And let's talk about some of the things we spoke about in episode 1, because as you say, we were talking about, would this be over by June? Obviously that turned out to be utter nonsense. And I think deep down, a lot of us knew that was utter nonsense. I don't know if any of us knew it was going to go on or were willing to think that it would go on this long. But it did give us a bit more, I don't know, it feels like we had a bit more certainty actually back then when we started this, because you thought, okay, we've got to get through this chunk and then it'll kind of be over. And now, like I say, it's just kind of a jumble and you really don't know what the future holds.
Yeah, I think so. I think we talked about it being a weird time, and this idea you're talking about all this and what will the kids remember. And actually, I'm not sure some of those kind of sort of positive messages, certainly for those of us who are fortunate enough to be home as a family and relatives who are safe and not having to, not on the front line of services in whatever degree. It was actually quite comforting. You, like you say, you knew what you needed to do, and you knew it was a period of time, a number of weeks. But we've kind of been through that now. My daughter was saying that she kind of couldn't really remember what life was like before the pandemic, which I thought she would do. She's only 11, but she's sort of thinking about the things they've missed out on. Whereas on but she's okay about it. My son had a great quip. It's sports day on Wednesday, and we were joking. I said, yeah, not going to be many kids at sports day. And actually adults we've known for a while that the adults weren't going to be invited in for sports day. And now they're down to 3 years competing against themselves in sports day. And my son said, at least there'll be more kids than last year when it didn't happen at all. So, there are little positives, but I think it's our uncertainty. And I think last year we felt like, if you all hunkered down for 3 months or whatever it might be, then it would be okay, and that things would change. And I think we've established that actually you're never going to get rid of COVID. You can only manage the response. And it is interesting at the moment that the government have gone down a particular direction. Lived experience is a bit strange. I think for Lisa, who usually goes into work on a Thursday, she didn't go last Thursday and she won't go the next 2 Thursdays, partly because she's concerned about, as it opens up, even fewer people will be wearing masks on public transport, which is one of the things that's striking for me when I went on the tube for the cricket is actually a high proportion of people in our carriage weren't wearing masks, and one person was wearing a lanyard, but otherwise it's like, well, some people have already made their own mind up about where this is going and how it's going. So,
yeah, I guess that's maybe people have had enough, and I don't know. Anyway, I think
people have had enough. Yeah,
podcast, really, isn't it? That's sort of politics podcast.
Yeah, it is. Yeah,
I can talk about that. But it's interesting you mentioned your wife, because she came up in the first episode as well. I thought there was a couple of things that really stood out for me in that first episode. Was one that you talked about. How your wife feels and how your family feel and how that was impacting on your experience then. And that seemed it was very clever of you. Just because over the last, since we started this, that is a theme that has come up time and again, right? I mean, through all this experience, how your partner and how your family has dealt with it has been a huge part of how, as a dad, how dads have coped with it, right?
Yeah, I think it permeates every part of your existence, your worries and your anxieties and other people's worries and anxieties, and it can become contagious. I think Lisa was quite emotional, I guess, on Saturday night. She was doing some ironing while we were just sort of finishing off stuff, and she was ironing school uniform that may not be worn, again. It's like, well, is Freya going to be able to wear this uniform next week? We hope she can, but those kind of little moments, and I think that's why at the moment it's the uncertainty. It's so much emotional up and down. It's just really hard. It would be really unusual for people not to be anxious about the lifting of restrictions. I think some people are really embracing it, but for a vast number of the population, I suspect there are levels of anxiety involved. And it definitely sort of permeates, and you have moments where you feel like everything's under control, and then something strikes you, and we can't do that, or if only we could do that, we'd feel differently. And I think sometimes it's not as straightforward as that, because so much is out of your control, regardless of whether you believe that masks are a waste of time, or whether you think vaccination is going to save us all, and it's a beautiful sunny day outside. I think there's so much going on. I think it's a thing, James. But thank you for saying it was clever. I'm not sure necessarily it was clever. I just was aware of how just this, you're just all in together and feeding off each other's anxieties and stresses. And I mean, what about for you?
It worked out to be it's clever with hindsight. I mean, that's the thing. Right?
Yeah.
But let's face it. Well, I mean, to be fair, I mean, none of us could have predicted how the next 18 months was going to play out. Let's face it. So, but yeah, I mean, the other thing I'm going to, now pick up on something I said that was clever, which was all the rest of the podcast, actually. No, I'm joking. The "How are you" section, which we have stuck with throughout, and I said something which we haven't sort of revisited since, but I wish we had, because I was like, oh, that's quite smart. That we were maybe at a stage where we were recognizing how important it is to ask "How are you," particularly ask men and how dads, and have a proper conversation about "How are you," and stop it from just being a glib "How are you?" All right, and turn it into something a bit more. I don't know how much that's really played out over the last 18 months. I think perhaps maybe that's I want to talk about sort of what we've been proud of, but I think maybe that's been a disappointment, not in terms of us and the podcast perhaps, but men and dads more generally. I'm not sure we have, as a cohort, and I mean, that's a ridiculous thing to suggest that we're speaking for all dads, but I don't know if we have seized that opportunity to talk more openly about how we are. Maybe that's still to come. Maybe we've had too many other things to think about, and maybe we just need to put more work in to make it happen. But I sort of feel like it has been an opportunity to do more, and perhaps we, society, whoever, haven't actually seized it.
Yeah, I think there's still an element of gallows humour sometimes, and making the best of things, and stiff upper lip kind of stuff. I think that still exists, but I think there are people who are. Yeah, I definitely find more friends sort of talking more openly about some of the particular challenges, and it is always. I think it's natural for it always to be sort of tainted with humour, and the humour is involved in that, and reminding ourselves homeschool again, reminding myself why we weren't a teacher, and being very open about that, or snapped at the kids again, and this kind of thing. People actually recognising that maybe it's just it lifts that weight, sharing some of the pressure, maybe feels it less of a weight on the shoulder. Because one of the things we were sort of talking about is, not necessarily in the first show particularly, but this idea of whether we were all in it together or not. And I think probably in reflection is that we might be on the, I saw something nice said, you might be on the same sea, but you're in very different experiences. And I think it's easy to assume that it's easy to dismiss someone else's experience because it doesn't look that bad, or to say your own experiences, or we're lucky. But actually recognizing that maybe things aren't so good for you, and being open about that, I think it does. Yeah, I think we are seeing signs of that, James. I like to think. I think more people are talking about their pressures to a certain extent.
Yeah, I think perhaps it's one to work on going forward. Actually, going forward, there's some good corporate talk. Because what I've found is, particularly because we haven't been able to actually see anybody and go out, is that when I do see people now, I'll say, "How's your pandemic been?" And then you will have a discussion. You'll say, "Well, you know what? It was pretty miserable in February," or whatever. And generally people say, "Oh, it's all right now." There's still that sort of all right, but people will say there was a moment when it was very, very bad. But as we see people more regularly again, perhaps that's the moment that we need to work on the "and how are you now" question, and keep in touch with that.
Yeah.
I mean, I sort of said that's. There you go. We've turned that. Maybe that's a disappointment. It's not. We're doing fine.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
So what are we on? Episode 46, did you say?
Episode number 46, yeah.
So
4 seasons worth. 4 seasons.
Yeah.
We spread them out a little bit more in season 4. We've done them every couple of weeks or so. Fewer in season 4.
I don't know. What do you feel looking back? I don't know. Listen to that first episode. I thought it might sound really stupid. I mean, oh God, we've got better or worse over that time. Actually, it's fairly consistent.
Yeah, I think so. We're on a pretty even keel.
But do you sort of look back and think, do you think it's been? Do you think, oh, I'm glad we started that? Are you proud of it? Worked out well?
Definitely. I've really enjoyed having conversations with people who who I knew about. Perhaps some people I knew quite well. I had my brother on for instance. You don't get much closer than a brother for all the delights that brings with it. But I really enjoyed the fact that we had really interesting conversations with people that we've worked with or have known in various different formats, whether it's friendship or through work, and having and getting together to have a conversation that potentially and hopefully helped other people. And so that we could take the knowledge and join the dots and say, actually, this is a really great conversation we can have with this particular individual, and that can help the audience to maybe understand more about what they were going through or take inspiration. And I think from that perspective, it's been really great. And just really good fun as well, is to have really interesting conversations with people that we know or wanted to know in some cases, because I think some cases when we hit record on the podcast, it's the first time we'd actually spoken to them in real life. I mean, in Zoom life, perhaps. So I've really enjoyed that bit.
One of the things that I sort of what we're most proud of, I think, do you know what? I don't think we've had a duff guest. I mean, all right, some people are going to like other guests more than others, and some they're all different. I was looking, I sort of made a list. We've had different people from different walks of life. We've had, politicians, comedians, coaches, lots of people from the sort of world of work. But we haven't had any that I look back and think, that was rubbish. That was a rubbish episode. And that's pretty good over 46 episodes. That is actually, it's not better than pretty good. It's hell of impressive to get through 46 episodes without an absolute stinker.
I think so. And
unfortunately, of course, from a LinkedIn point of view, it's no use to say everyone's as good as everyone else. What we really need to do is pick out some names, particularly the ones with big LinkedIn followings. Your brother, he was brilliant because he's got 50,000 followers on Instagram, so he was the best. Get him to retweet us or whatever it is on Instagram.
Exactly.
But the only one I would pick out that was bad was Philip Simon. Not because he was a bad guest, but we had some technical issues. We did that one in the evening. I think that's the only one we did in the evening, and you could tell there was a slight tiredness to everyone, and the tech went wonkazoid, particularly when he tried to tell a joke and the punchline disappeared. And that, I don't know, to some extent that sums up lockdown life, doesn't it? You try to tell a joke, but the punchline wasn't there. The punchline wasn't there. I don't know. It sort of feels like that's lockdown life summed up in a few minutes.
I think so, and also it pointed towards that struggle of his particular job, which at the time was just kind of disastrous to be a comedian. And we had a couple of comedians on. Tiernan was the other comedian we had on quite early on, but it just pointed those stresses and pressures of the technology, but also actually losing your livelihood and things being pulled away from you very abruptly with no obvious sort of end. It's quite a poignant one, I think, with Philip in particular, and also Tiernan. But Philip, the combination of the tech and also the circumstances and how hard that must be to have been a comic in the last year. It's just I can't really imagine.
Yeah, he was a good guest, just to be clear. Not suggesting he was not a good guest, but it was
a good joke as well. It was a very good joke.
Well, it would have been if you could tell it in a one-up, maybe. Shows the mechanics of any joke. If you take away the punchline, it doesn't quite work. But I sort of went through the list. I mean, there's been some. We hit quite a difficult period, I suggest, when we did Rhian Mannings and Brian Ballantyne. Both really impressive people. Lots of really interesting to say, but obviously both with challenges that we discussed. But which were interesting and obviously very worthwhile to discuss. I was reminded about Ady Griffiths and his mindfulness. That one I still think is possibly the most useful one of the whole lot, actually, for dads is to step back and take a deep breath. And the other one I thought, like I say, they're all good. All right. I mean, it seems ridiculous to pick out ones that are either better or worse than others. We've done really well to have lots of really good ones there. Yeah,
I really enjoyed Jamie Beaglehole, one half of Daddy and Dad. Partly an enormous amount of fun as well as sort of learning about the adoption journey of a single-sex couple. So I thought that was really interesting. I really enjoyed his company as well. I thought he was great fun. Other people, Nathan McGurl, founder of the Study Buddy, another person who was just a lot of fun. People bringing different things. I think talking sort of when we talked sort of the research side of things, we talked to Laura and Jasmine, both researchers in this field. That was a different kind of angle because we're bringing the data in a sense, to the experiences that in some cases we were talking about, those kind of quite real experiences of couples and dads in particular navigating through the pandemic and the stresses. And then we were taking a little bit of a sort of higher view, maybe a little bit like coming up in a helicopter and seeing the overall picture and using some of the data around the work that they've been doing with parents in the pandemic, I think was the research piece that they were doing. So that was quite interesting.
And whatever we are, it's really stupid, this pandemic, because it has weird numbers. Everyone's like 17 months. 17 months isn't a thing. Nobody talks about 17 months. 18 months, a year, 18 months. Let's have nice round numbers. But call it 18 months on from the beginning. I don't know. What's your how's the pandemic been for you in terms of what's changed? Have you got more work? Are men? Has what we hoped happened in terms of your experience? Are more men thinking about their lives and their work life going forward?
I think they probably are, but I'm going to caveat that with when I first started up Inspiring Dads, it was very much, I really wanted to work with individual dads, a kind of business to consumer model, and I found that really, really hard to support men and take them through that process where you knew they had a pain point because they'd sign up to mailing lists, that kind of thing. But actually, very few men would actually take the step. They'd have a call with you, clearly have an issue, or there was clearly something there they wanted to work on, but moving it was quite hard. What I have definitely found is that after budgets were put on hold in the first half of the pandemic, in the last, say, 3 or 4 months, is that businesses are recognizing that there is a need to support dads, and they're saying actually and it is tied to the gender equality angle that's always been there, and actually if you can support dads, new dads, that side of things, budgets open up a bit, and the sort of work that I've done, and you can call it work, which posting on LinkedIn that I've done for the last year or so has certainly come to fruition when you have conversations with a key potential lead who says, I feel like I already know you because we're connected on LinkedIn. And so that consistency of telling the story and raising the awareness for businesses to say, actually, supporting dads is good for well-being, it's good for mental health. And we look at the work of campaigners like sort of Elliot Ray in particular, I would think of, who was on the all-party parliamentary group for dads, doing a presentation about engaging men, talk about his great book Dad, with all the stories that he's collated, and campaigning and being consistent about that message where actually men do struggle. They may not talk about it, but they do struggle, and helping them helps their families, helps their kids, helps the broader sort of challenges that society faces. I think that's the thing that it's really been noticeable to me, is that it's the work you do when things are quiet comes through later on when people are actually, we know what you're talking about and we want to talk about more, we want to help guys. So let's have a conversation. So that's what I've been finding, whether it's necessarily individual dads.
Yeah, that's interesting then, isn't it? Because like I say, from the off, we were sort of hoping that there would be some positive to take out of all this. It would be a sort of change in the where dads are at. And I don't think we have seen that yet. But it's interesting what you say, that if you count the turbulence of the last 18 months as the quiet time, then, and if we're recording this on Freedom Day, if we are moving towards some sort of normality, whatever that is going to look like, that might be the point at which things actually do change. Because realistically, nobody was going to start shaking up their lives in the middle of a pandemic, but as you move out of it, that might be the reflection point, hopefully. Yeah,
but certainly individual dads, every individual conversation, like sort of yesterday, went to a barbecue, man talking about the fact that he can't see himself going back to work more than 3 days a week, and it's just better for everyone. And someone else saying, well, I'm not going to go into the office on Monday because none of my team are, so we're going to work smarter. We're going to be in together and we're going to do stuff collaboratively. We're going to use that time profitably in the office, but not necessarily feel like we have to be there all the time. Kind of the hybrid model that I think we talk about, these absolutes where you either a work from home person or a once in a blue moon because the boiler needed fixing, I think, or you were in the office. And I think we are moving away from that. Individual dads are having those conversations, are saying it, whether that translates, I think that's the big question, isn't it, James, is whether that individual conversations translate, and whether we can, how much dads are going to understand that other dads feel the same way, and whether they can be nudged in the right direction.
Yeah. I think that's, that came up in the chat we had with Will in the last episode, didn't it, about sort of, role modeling and talking about your experience and all that sort of stuff. And yeah, that's interesting. I think there probably is a gap for some best practice in hybrid working, because I'm sure you are as well, various different models of it where, some people are in on some days. I was talking to somebody the other day who said, their company said, right, everyone has to be in Tuesday, Wednesday. And they were like, I'm not sure that's really what I want to do. I'd rather be a bit more flexible. I don't know what the answer is. I don't think anybody knows. I think it's okay to say we don't know yet. But it's okay for somebody, I don't know, maybe that's us, to say, we'll work on figuring out what the best practice is in hybrid working and share it. And then everybody's lives are better. Hybrid working, there's a thing that I'm trying to work out. I'm trying to do the old clunky gear change here. Is that a tip? It's not really, is it? It's not. I can't really think that.
I think the tip connected to that is something that Will was talking about last week, Will McDonald, which is around imagination, and that using your imagination to design something that works for you, or at least consider the ideas, consider the possibilities. I mean, he was talking about in particular around job share, but I think it would go for everything. Is, while things are in flux and while things are still very much up in the air, use your imagination to think about how could things be different. What would you do in your work? Where would you work, and how would you work if you could start from the ground up? Some people, I think, have actively done that, and you see that number of children. Central London schools, I think, in certain parts, certainly southwest London, I've been hearing that kids are just being moved. They're moving out. They're moving out of the city to a certain extent. And not everyone has that choice, but we all have a choice about imagination.
Yeah,
I think.
Yeah, that's a different podcast. The disappearing children from schools, which is not part of London life that I ever anticipated, but it has definitely been accelerated over the last 18 months. I think a lot of people move out at that switch to secondary school, but I think that's been accelerated, and what that means for kids that stay like mine, I'm not quite sure. But anyway, that's a different podcast. That's not just a London Guardian education podcast or something. That's what that is. I want to move on to. Let's try to clunkily get onto tips, because that's how we've always ended, for better or worse. I'll go with my discussion about pants with Jessica Chivers. That was not good at all. And what's coming here. What's coming. Your discussion about electric bills with an international pop star as the worst tips. The thing is, that tip wasn't a bad tip. It was just the weird juxtaposition of electric bills and a man who has
probably doesn't worry about his electric bills too often.
Pop stars still have to pay electric bills, like I say, it wasn't a bad tip. It was a strange contrast that has stuck in my mind. But there you go. When I think back to all the tips, that's one I remember.
Exactly.
I don't remember them all, but I certainly remember that one.
Exactly. It was a strange one, yeah. I thought you were going to go with carrots from last week. But,
I blanked that one. But.
I think there was a theme. I mean, in episode 1 we learned about non-iron shirts and how you had to hang them up. So I mean, I thought you set the bar pretty low to start with, James.
That was a good tip. That was like a
practical.
But it had a broader meaning. I thought about that one because episode 1 I had a lot of time to think about it and a lot of tips. Episode 46 or 45 to run out.
It gets harder. I think when I was looking back through some of the tips, it was more, there was a theme. There were 2 themes that have come through. Not every, obviously it's not every week, but it's 2 themes that I thought were important that were picked out by guests time and time again. I think we probably covered them as well. Is be aware of what time you need to yourself in order to be able to reset and for your own mental health, and be kind to yourself as well, and not to beat yourself up if you're not achieving everything you think you ought to be achieving. I think there's a time for that, but also you can add in if you're doing your own time, make sure that the people around you have the time that they need as well. So, taking the time and being kind to yourself, I think was a theme that is worth reiterating, because it's better than carrots or checking your energy bills necessarily. Energy bills is important. Or the one I particularly enjoyed was the one about the cable. If you had the cable between the laptop and the TV screen, when you were doing like some kind of home lesson, in this case it was a kids, I think it was ballet and football training, and then they didn't have to watch on the small screen, they could have it on the big TV, but then obviously you're using the camera on the laptop, and if you had the right cable, you just sync the two up, and that was actually really, really useful to learn that. So that became a tip.
One for the ages, cables, and what you're back schooling, and we're all going to be working from home in hybrid working. Cables are going to matter, and you got to know your cables. That's an important one. When it comes to our sort of best tip, there's only one that I come back to time and time again, which is good enough is good enough. Is that give yourself a break, particularly in these difficult times. All right, in a year's time, if everything's hunky-dory, by all means start slathering on the pressure on yourself if that's what you want to do and that's how you live. I'm not saying that's for everyone, but right now, just don't. Just give yourself a break. Good enough is good enough.
That one's the one that you've come back to before. Good enough is good enough. I think, and I think I've referenced it in coaching as well, James.
I don't know who I stole it from, because I didn't think of it. I stole it from somebody else. I can't remember who. So sorry, whoever it was. And I think, well, I don't know. See if you agree. Here's my final tip, and maybe it's the tip that we should both end with, which is if you want more of us or more of these in some form, then get in touch. If nobody gets in touch, then it's over. All right. If anyone out there wants to hear more of this nonsense, then there's ways to get in touch, right? Ask for more, and then we'll consider how we might do some more in future. Yeah,
because we have talked about it before of how this might develop into something different, but there's time and all those wonderful things that get in the way. So do please get in touch if you've liked this, and subscribe. I mean, you can still listen back to the other 45 episodes, which are jam-packed with all sorts of interesting and quirky kind of conversations, and like you say, there have been all sorts of great guests who have been involved. So it's a good opportunity to thank them all. If any of them are listening back who have been on the show, thank you.
You're all going to get added on LinkedIn.
You are.
Single one of you. Every single one of you.
Exactly. So it's been a pleasure, James. I think that's the most important thing. It has been. A year ago, we'd already done several of these. 18 months ago, then it hadn't occurred to me that I would be co-hosting a podcast, and yet here we are. So it's a bit strange to be finishing off. I'm sure I'll be delighted when I upload the last one and do the show notes, and go, let's just leave that for a moment.
Yeah, I mean, the aim, what we set out to achieve was something to do in lockdown. So we achieved that. If nothing else, it's been something to do.
Interesting, provocative, and relevant, James, I think is what you actually meant to say. And something to do. I mean, it was something to do.
On recording, but I think, fundamentally it was something to do whilst lockdown, on furlough, etc., etc. And we've achieved that and more. And I think, as this conversation today has shown, the conversation is not over. There is lots more to talk about going forward. And obviously you and I are on LinkedIn. You blog all over the shop these days.
Yep.
After I made you.
Yes, exactly. Got a taste for it. That's the problem.
Whereas I don't. And maybe I'll start blogging some more. I do intend to start blogging some more and get back into Dad's space over the summer. But yes, get in touch if you want more of these, and get in touch if you just want to discuss Dad stuff with either of us or both of us or whatever. We're open to either opportunities or just chatting.
Absolutely. So thank you very much, everyone, for watching and listening. So this is the last episode of Lockdown Dads in its current guise. This is episode number 46. Thank you very much for being with us. James, pleasure as always, and I will see you soon.
Yes, indeed. We will have the actual toast.